Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 12 of Self Pub Sunday. Today, we're joined by Michael Roberti, author of the Crown and Tide series, SPFBO author. Today, we're going to be talking about the Traitors We Are and the Revenge of Thousands, and I'm really excited for this show. I literally just finished the Traitors We Are 30 minutes ago, and my brain is still swarming with everything that happened at the end. So, Michael, I wanted to start first with talking about kind of your writing career and how you got started as a writer. Did you always want to be a writer, or did you come to it later?
That's a really good question. When I was little, I was kind of infatuated with poetry and stuff like that, and I used to write a lot of poetry. And I would write little things that I thought that would be books as I progressed, but nothing that really made any traction. And then when I was in college, I was going to be a business major, and unfortunately, I can't do any math at all, and I don't know what I was thinking. So I was about 20 years old, maybe about to be 21, and I was like, well, either I need to make a change, or I'm going to be in trouble. So I decided to be an English teacher, and my idea was that I wouldn't teach for very long, and I would be a writer because I always wanted to write. And then I ended up really liking teaching, and I still mostly do. I mean, it's been 12 years in the classroom. But the writing, I did a little bit here and there, like, again, little bits of things that would never really became novels. I did write one book in 2014-15 that was absolutely terrible, and I still have in the same world as the Traitors We Are, more or less, but it was back when I still used a lot of like dwarves and elves and things like that. And I still have some of those ideas that are going to eventually be put into it, but yeah, I mean, the Traitors We Are is the first thing I ever really put out there that I honestly like. I mean, it was significantly longer than the other one too, and the other one never saw editing because I realized that it just wasn't what it was supposed to be.
Well, it's a fantastic start for your first published book.
Well, thank you.
So, speaking of writing, do you have any writing inspirations, or I like to call them writing heroes?
Most of mine, I always kind of feel weird about it, is are not fantasy writers. And it's another thing is when I do read a pretty good amount of fantasy, but I read more literary fiction usually. But the books that really kind of sparked my brain for fantasy and just kind of wanting to do more with that was Song of Ice and Fire. I think there's a pretty clear through line of inspiration there. The Joe Abercrombie books, I love his character work. To me, he's one of the guys that make characters feel very distinct and unique. And then the one that I've cooled on a lot, but the first book that I ever read by him just blew my mind, was The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, and the way he presents that world. And I really did not enjoy. I mean, Words of Radiance, I bounced off of and then came back to and liked okay. The next one was pretty good, and then the fourth one, I just, he's got his fans. He seems like a wonderful dude, overall. But it's not what I want. I mean, especially since they're so long, it's not really what I want. The biggest influence, though, for me, in a weird way, is probably Kazuo Ishiguro, and his whole, the uncertainty of memory. What do we really know? How do characters interact, and what are the meaningful interactions that kind of that life is really about, rather than the big, long, broad plot of the story. I really like how he sets that up.
Yeah. One thing that I had noticed, and it was interesting that you hadn't read this series yet, and I've only read 2 books in this series. When I was in, I think it was the first half of the Traitors We Are, I was getting Faithful in the Falling vibes by John Gwynne, and he does a lot, just like A Song of Ice and Fire, with multiple point of views and weaving them into one storyline, like George R. R. Martin does, and you've done in The Traitors We Are. And it felt like your stories were different but similar, if that makes sense. And his books are big. like a lot of fantasy books tend to be. And like I said, I can only speak to the first two in that series.
Mhm.
Um, I haven't DNF'd this series. I just haven't gotten back to the second books because you know how it goes. Other
Oh
books
yeah.
come up and life happens, and you're like, yeah, I do need to finish that series. One thing that I could appreciate about John Gwynn's books, at least from what I hear and what I've witnessed so far, is that he learns lessons from each book he's written,
Hmm.
and each book, the writing gets better
Right.
as you progress in the series. And fans have noticed even in his new series that that's even better in the writing than The Faithful and the Fallen, which was his first series.
Hmm.
And I just love to see that kind of progression. And I feel like for me, even though I really enjoyed both of your books, I and the Revenge of Thousands was a true novella. It was
Hmm.
like less than 200 pages,
Right.
which I really appreciated. It made it able to fit both those books into my TBR this month. I could see the progression of your writing just in that little novella that we got after we got The Traitors We Are. The Traitors We Are is great. It's really good, but your writing gets even better in The Revenge of Thousands.
I'm really glad to hear that. Somebody
At
else had
least
mentioned that. Oh, well, that really is what I was hoping for. I kind of noticed that as I was writing it, like things that used to seem hard are no longer as hard as they used to be. I felt like I could kind of play around a little bit more. It also was a little bit hard because like there's more constraints in the story. Like there's certain things I couldn't mess with because things have to happen a certain way that so traders can happen. But I really appreciate that. That's how I'm hoping Grave will eventually be too. And I'm kind of taking the shackles off a little bit and trying to open up the scale, not a ton, but enough that there's, it's not, and I mean, like, you kind of can boil down the Traitors We Are to like those two locations. You have the battle and then you have the keep, and that's really all it is. And this one, we're gonna see a little bit more of the world, not like as much as maybe I know some people were talking about like wanting to see a lot more of it. That'll probably be like you said with the other author, Gwen, the next series. I'm gonna try to open up that as well. But I'm like it's kind of like you point out, like you feel like Revenge got stronger. I feel like I was trying to mask my deficiencies as a writer in the Traitors We Are sometimes, like going towards my strengths. And then sometimes like maybe even discovering what some of those strengths were. Cause like I wasn't even like thinking, oh, I need this to be an amazing book. I was thinking like, I just need this. I need to see if I can write a book, that's kind of where I was at with it.
it felt like you in The Traitors We Are, you were kind of still feeling out your characters
Mm-hmm.
and trying to figure out where they were going and what was going to happen. But in The Revenge of Thousands, it felt like you had a good grasp on the characters in that novella, and it showed through your writing.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it.
At least in my point of view.
Sure.
So, speaking of The Traitors We Are, let's go into a spoiler-free chat for folks out there that are watching this that haven't read it yet. I'm sure you'll hear all about The Traitors We Are in the next several months because Michael has entered it into the SPFBO competition. I always get those letters mixed
I
up
do
and I have
too.
to like visualize it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, sorry also for being blurry. My camera likes to go in and out, and usually it like refocuses by now, but it's just decided that this is all focused on you anyways, Michael.
Oh,
So
okay.
so can you give us your elevator pitch?
Okay.
Pitch,
Yeah.
not speech. For The Traitors We Are.
So, and I've thought about this like in kind of like if we're talking about it at its base level, like really it's about three main characters with a few other people who join in throughout to tell a story, navigating the end of a war that then becomes an uneasy peace, and when as they kind of go through this, they notice that a lot of the things that they held to be true, a lot of the facts about the war, their world, their place in it, turned out to be lies, and they all three want some things that are similar, a happy ending, a peaceful, peaceful world to not have to deal with these things anymore. But it's just kind of at every turn, either mistakes that they make or mistakes that others make blur the lines between friends and enemy, peace and war, and it just becomes more of a mess.
So, what makes the Traitors We Are different than other dark fantasy?
I think, and I was talking to somebody about this the other day. I think I talk a lot to Andrew Meredith about writing, and he'll talk to me about the Collation Saga. I'll talk to him about the Crown of Tide series, and he had read and I've read all of his books. I'm a big fan of his. That's actually how we became friends. But he had read the Traitors We Are, and I think what he kind of hit at, and what a few other people hit at, is kind of what might even be a little bit polarizing for some people about it. Is it's the mix of simple life moments and big other betrayals or battle scenes or whatever. But I mean, like, to me that's like sort of what I want to hit at, is the fact that, like, and I was thinking about this like the other day too, is like, a lot of times, fantasy battles tend to be like Charge of the Light Brigade, where it's a lot of let's go fight, victory, we're all in this. And I've never been to war, but I mean, I know a lot of people who have, and it really, the vibe that I get from it is it's a lot of waiting around until it isn't, and it's really awful.
Yeah. So where did you get the idea for the Traitors We Are from?
So this is all right. So this was supposed to be a standalone, and actually the story was supposed to, the main thing that's supposed to happen was supposed to happen in the Traitors We Are. I learned about querying and agents and stuff like that because I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it, and found out you only are supposed to have 120,000 words, which is why it is a little bit shorter. But the whole thing kind of comes from this idea that I had, where I was talking to one of my really good friends that I play Dungeons and Dragons with, and I was thinking, like, the world, I use it as the Dungeons and Dragons setting, and I was thinking, well, this will be slightly spoiler, but there's something that I felt like the world needed. And I was trying to think of a way to give it that. So this is like an origin story of a very specific thing. And a few other things, actually. I threw in a few other stories in there too, because if it was just the one thing, I felt like that one thing is compelling, but there are two other main events that happen around that time period in the lore of the world. One of which we'll see in A Grave for Us All. Within the first part, we're actually gonna see that as, I think, either the second to last chapter or the last chapter of the first part, and then the final chapters of the third book, when I get to write it, we'll have that other big event, and it will kind of, I think, bring things a little bit full circle. But hopefully I can pull it off. I don't know. Maybe I can.
So did your stories or your characters come to you first?
The broad strokes of the characters came first, and then I tried writing the story like forever ago, and I had some of the first chapter, what became the first chapter, down already. So like Kale existed, Finbar was there, the part with Daros was there, Orden Lorson, but like Merrily was theoretical and didn't have a name yet. Emil, I had no idea what kind of person Emil was going to be, except for what I knew that he needed to do in the story, and that was not what I was expecting at all. I even remember writing his first chapter and being like, why is this guy going to the back of this cart? But I mean, it worked, but it just kind of took me there,
Yeah. So that's a great segue into our spoiler chat.
Okay.
So if you're watching this and you haven't read The Traitors We Are yet, go read it and then come back and watch the rest of this, so you're not spoiled to what happens, because there's a lot that happens in that book that you won't want to be spoiled for. So with that, do you have a favorite character, or who is the easiest character to write?
My favorite characters, it's kind of like I go back and forth on them. I love them all like they're my children, but Merrily is probably got the place in my heart for my favorite, just because, like, just her attitude about things, just her, like, her defiance. In my original draft, back when I was including profanity, she had by far the filthiest mouth by like a long shot. And then Freya, I like a lot, and I feel like she didn't get enough screen time in Traitors, so I try to go back and give her a little bit more. And then she and Eric are going to be mostly split POVs at a certain point, but they're gonna get a lot more screen time because they ended up being, I think, not only my favorites but fan favorites as well. And I thought too, like I actually really thought Eric was gonna die in chapter 4. Like it's supposed to be him and not Finbar, and I was like, well, his weird like antagonism with Emil is kind of nice. But they're easy. Kale's pretty easy. The hardest one for me, like by far the hardest one for me, is Orden. Those chapters were, because like it's just like a different way of looking at the world that is not always nice.
Yeah. You have a great way of describing your characters in your writing, so I know exactly the image that I'm supposed to have of all of these characters. Well, I say that not knowing the image that you had when you were writing them,
sure.
But in my brain, I didn't have to question how any of the characters were supposed to look, and that's not always the case in writing. I'm a very visual reader, and I can't help but imagine things when I'm writing them. And some books I read, I have a hard time because I can't imagine those things.
Right.
But with your writing and your characters, my brain knew exactly what each one of the characters were supposed to look like.
That's good, because I always worry because like I'm not very descriptive, especially with the appearances, and so like I try to give a few things, and then I'm like, hopefully, I mean, I really launched it thinking like we'll just see what people make of this, and hopefully people like it.
Yeah. John Palladino always says that people are going to imagine the characters whatever they want, and that's why he doesn't describe his characters in a lot of detail,
right,
to their physical appearance. And maybe it's because I've watched a lot of Viking movies and TV shows, so I have like those base characters already in my mind. So we talked about your favorite characters. What was your favorite scene?
That's a good question. Let me think. I think I got a couple. Okay, I know exactly what my favorite scene is. But I think my favorite ones are where like I hopefully subvert some expectations. And I remember my wife was like, "Why'd you call this book The Traitors We Are?" Because she didn't read early drafts because she was afraid she was going to hate it, and she ended up liking it, which was good. But the intermission chapters with Darius and Lorson made her very, very upset. And I've gotten a few like messages like immediately after that happens. Like, I mean, I think maybe if you read Revenge first, that might be a little bit more obvious. But my favorite scene, and this is something I really, really wanted to get down, and I think like, and like, there's kind of a divided opinion about it, but was the Zora point of view chapter where she dies at the end, and I had one person tell me, well, everybody knows she's going to die at the end of that chapter, and that's kind of the point to me, is that the inevitability of it, like you see it coming, it's going to happen. You don't want it to happen, and you just kind of, and that's like the Ishiguro. Like, I mean, I'm not saying like my writing's nothing like Ishiguro. He's like a Nobel Prize winner, but that inevitability, like, it never let me go, which I won't spoil. But like at the very end of it, like you're hoping so hard that things are going to go a different way, but they really can't, Yeah. And that's what I really like that chapter.
Well, one of the things that stood out to me, especially with the Traitors We Are, is that there were certain events that I knew essentially were going to happen, but I didn't expect them to happen the way that they did. And so I was like, all along, I kind of expected Kiernan to essentially take Kel's place, but I had no idea it was going to happen as a subterfuge to then kill his father and take over essentially, except for Marilee's place, the whole family's place in this conspiracy that was his dad's to begin with.
Yeah.
So it was like, when it happened, I was like, okay, I saw him coming and this happening to him, but at the same time, I was still surprised because I didn't see it in that manner. I didn't know how it was going to happen, but I knew,
Mhm.
that was going to happen. But at the same time, I was completely surprised by it.
I get you. And that's something I tried to work on with it. And like, like you gotta balance the foreshadowing so it's like there, but it's not too much. And with him, like, I kind of knew that he had some role in the story early on. I actually had to go back and rewrite it so that there's more foreshadowing for him.
Mhm.
But I love like the image, like how everybody is so creeped out by him. Like every
Yeah,
time they describe him, they're like, "Oh, he's so creepy, he's so bad." Let's and then it's like, but you can't stop him.
right.
Um, and he's going to become a point of view character in the next one as well. And actually, his are my favorite to write because he's like, unlike Orton, who had like a really high opinion of himself and like thought he was a genius.
Yeah.
Kieran is just like, what am I going to do next? I'm not really sure, but let's mess stuff up.
Um, so what was the hardest scene to write?
Mm, the very, very end was very difficult to try to get that to match up right with Alvin and the King. That was really hard. Anything where there's a lot of description of the surroundings was very difficult.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I want to say like the ending was probably the hardest part. Like at one point, I actually found I had to just write the conversations and then flesh out the other stuff afterwards and try to come back to it. Because it's just like there's a lot of moving pieces at the end
Yeah.
where if like and I know a few people because like there's that time skip where you go back to Orton after a long time of not seeing him,
Mhm.
and that I would maybe take back slightly and somehow, but that was really hard to get down exactly how I wanted it, and I think I mostly got there with it.
Mhm. So, what do you want readers to come away with after reading The Traitors We Are?
Um, that's tough. I think mainly empathy, like for people in bad situations, is a big thing, and I think holding our leaders to higher standards as well. That's I try not to get super political, but like a coworker of mine said, it is a political book, and I mean it is to a degree. Why does the keep have all the power and the reach has nothing?
Mhm.
Why do they? Why is the keep working so hard to keep everything? And like I'm not trying to like start a revolution or anything. I'm not saying this is like a super serious book, but like I think that the best fiction has some connection to the real life, and I just hope that people think, maybe how can I make life easier for people in a less fortunate situation? How can I hold my leaders accountable?
So, we have 1.5 books
Mhm.
now, and you're working on book 2
Yeah.
right now. What else can we expect from the series?
Book two is the cast. I mean, it's mainly the same localities. There is a little bit more in where General Finlux is from. He goes back to a place called Parlis. So you see a little bit of that. There's a little bit more things that are in the margins between the two areas. Um, but mainly, the kind of the first part of that book is going to be, and I think I really like where I came with it, but it's like after the end of the Traitors We Are, you kind of have to take a step back and think like nothing's going to happen for a very small amount of time. Probably there's probably a couple of months where things have to settle down. So we
Mhm.
have a slight time jump where Marilee and Emil are living in the governor's mansion, trying to decide. Well, I mean, it's posted on my website. Like, it's a very small spoiler, if I can say the small spoiler.
Sure.
So Marilee is trying to figure out what her relationship to Emil is, and also what her relationship to who she is at this point. And her mother-in-law lives with them, and is basically saying like, "Look, you've got to get pregnant because you do not have any power here." And she's like, "I don't really want to do that." But at the end of the first chapter, Hortense and Grieg show up, and Hortense is pregnant, and it is Emil's.
Of course.
And yeah, and so that kind of speeds along the timeline of how does Marilee cement her place. And then you have Kale in prison. Um, Freya is back in the tides, trying to kind of figure out like, okay, well, I love this boy from the keep, but I really don't know if I'm ever going to see him again. Eric is petitioning to get Kale out of prison because he knows he didn't do it, even though Kale is not like the best person. He definitely didn't do that. And Kieran is trying to make peace happen with the people who are unsatisfied with how the war ended. It makes things significantly worse. So that's kind of where we start off with it. Eventually, it's going to become a multinational conflict to some degree because there's a little bit of opportunism that's going to take place. But that's it. If it comes together the way I want to, I think it'll be really good.
So, are there bands? They got Kale and Freya and the other person that was with them when they originally got arrested. They got released, but then they got banned.
Yes.
From the keep. Is their band still in place?
Yes. So they're without spoiling too much, there's some sneaking back into the keep for certain things. As you know, in the epilogue chapters, Zopa of Goal, like he shows up and he has some ideas of what they need to be doing. But yes, they stay banned. I think, well, Core wasn't one of them. Oh yeah, no, the other girl doesn't come back. She is referenced in chapter 4 very briefly. Her and Freya kind of share a like upset nod, and Freya notices that she had to amputate her leg that had gotten injured.
Oh, right.
Because it the rot had set in, and it's kind of how like she was like the least involved in it, but she still had to pay the price for it. But yeah, so I mean, Freya's still banned. There's gonna be some subterfuge.
Right. Of course. I want to take a moment to talk about the prequel novella.
Okay.
Since we've got some time here, and we focused more on the Traitors We Are. So after the Traitors We Are was released, then we got this prequel novella.
Yeah.
The Revenge of Thousands, which, unlike many people, I actually read first. And we were chatting about this before we went live. I know you were interested to know, the experience of reading the novella first compared to second, and comparing it to how others experienced it when they read it second. And I think partly it depends on the reader and what they look to get out of books that they're reading. For me, reading The Revenge of Thousands first was the best idea.
Oh, okay.
Because I am a reader that needs an emotional attachment to characters. And although I loved the characters in Traitors We Are, I don't know if I would have gotten as much of an attachment to the characters if I didn't read the prequel novella first, where we got the introduction to the main players there. And then I feel like, at least for me, jumping straight into the Traitors We Are, I would feel like, well, this is good writing. These are good characters. But I don't know, because everyone is a traitor in a sense.
Yeah.
And there's so much subterfuge. I would be a little bit lost trying to figure out who we, the readers, are supposed to trust and follow along in this story, because we get so many different points of views. But because we got the Revenge of Thousands, I got the Revenge of Thousands first. And that kind of, pointed our eyes to where we're supposed to be following. It helped me be able to follow the characters and feel some kind of an attachment, whether it's a good attachment or
right,
like this guy is dirt and he's got to get it sooner or later.
Yeah.
It helped kind of focus my attention on the characters and be able to figure out who is what in the story, and kind of follow their stories in the right way.
Oh, for sure. And I think too, like, I get that 100% because like it was also kind of like with Traitors, it was like, how grimdark do I want to take this? And there's a couple places where I really changed my mind and kind of went lighter with it. Cause I mean, I don't mind grimdark all the time, but at the same time, like it just didn't really suit the story I was trying to tell. But like that's the thing too, is a lot of times people were saying like, well, why is Kale upset all the time? And now you have the Revenge of Thousands. It's I mean, like there's a lot of subtext there, and you have to think too, like he fought this whole war that I guess I don't really show it. But kind of the other problem too is Marilee and Emil really steal the show pretty early, and I wasn't expecting that as well. So like I needed to give Kale a little bit of time to shine. I wanted to remind people because Emil doesn't necessarily get a redemption arc, but you kind of come to sympathize with him more throughout the story. But I wanted people to remember, like Emil, he is trying to do his best, but his best might not be very good,
Right.
And then Marilee and Darius, I thought too, like I mainly wanted to make people upset with that, but like the thing too is like they're like, why is she so upset about her boyfriend dying? And it's like, well, I mean, I don't understand how that's a question. I mean,
Right.
but it that was one for me. Like that was hard to write a little bit. Kind of like some of the scenes in because like there's going to be a Great for Us All is a pretty appropriate name. There's going to be a lot of people dying. Some minor, some major. And a lot of it has been planned since before I started, but it's just going to be like, how does it all shake out? But I'm glad that, because that's kind of what I was hoping for with the Revenge of Thousands, is that like I wanted it to be a book that kind of stood on its own and could be enjoyed first, but would also give people who had read Traitors something that they could enjoy while I work on the other book, because it is only about 30 something thousand words, and it was one of those things like Grave's going to probably take me a little bit longer than I expected in some ways, because it is much more complicated a story than Traitors was. And
Right.
I'm about like 90,000 words into that, and I could be 2/3 done. I could be halfway done. It's really hard to say.
I think for me, you mentioned Darius, and for me, if I read Traitors We Are first, Darius's death
Right.
wouldn't have done anything for me. I'd be like, oh, that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Kale's friend, but okay. But reading The Revenge of Thousands first, we get to know Darius at a deep level, and then one of the very first things that happens in the Traitors We Are is his death, and that so it hit me a lot harder because I got to know him for half of the prequel. Really,
Right.
he takes up a good part of the
Yeah.
prequel. So that, because if we jump straight into Traitors We Are without the prequel, I don't, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but
No, I agree.
I don't know if we know that he's engaged to Marilee before we get to his death.
No. Yeah.
So it would be like, for me, that was one of the things that really benefited reading The Revenge of Thousands first, because I was like, oh, okay. It's one of those books now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas if I read The Traitors We Are first, I'd be like, okay, our main character just lost his best friend, so
Right.
it would be more about Kale
Yeah.
than the ensemble cast that you have.
And that's honestly, that's kind of what it was at first. And that's why I wanted to go back and give him a little bit more. Cause like a lot of people, and I really liked him too. But like conversely, like, and I agree with that assessment 100%, is like, you're supposed to be like, oh man, this sucks. The war's terrible. This guy needs to go do something. Oh man, but like the one I get from people who read Traitors first is when Darius and Marilee are talking about the future, and they're laying in bed together and they're being cute, people are like, you're evil. Like, why would you go back and show us this? Why can't these people be happy?
Well, I appreciated it. I also loved our introduction to Emil, where he's like, he goes and kills Lorson, and then he's like, do I stick around or do I just go home now while I'm on high? And then he goes and gets drunk, and you find him, next thing you find him, he's in the back of this cart hiding. And he's like, oh crap, I hear fighting. That's way too close than it should be. Now what do I do? And he like stumbles out onto Kale, and I think it was Eric fighting.
Yep.
And he's like, well, I guess I'm here now. Might as well take care of the other brother.
Yeah. That I did not expect. And like there's a time where I was writing that fight between Kale and Eric, and I'm like, well, what's going to happen here? Because like Kale kind of won, and originally I was going to have Eric die, but I really liked him as a counterpoint to both of them. Because like he's martial like Kale. He's a fighter like Kale is, but like he's definitely in a lot of ways a better person than Kale, or at least he tries to be. And then he's more he's noble like Emil, but like he actually tries to be good. And so I'm like, well, how do I not kill him? Like, what else could happen? And I'm like, oh shoot, and he just jumps out with his sword. And my favorite line is where Eric is like, did you just kill Kale? And he's like, yeah, I think I did.
Yeah.
He doesn't check or anything. He's just like, yeah, I probably did.
Yeah. And then he's so shocked when Kale shows up.
Yeah.
Crap. That dude was supposed to be dead. I really liked where Eric's character went in the Traitors We Are. He was one of the unexpected characters. Every time he was on page, you knew what his character was like, but you didn't know what to expect from him.
Yeah.
And so he was always, keeping me as a reader on my toes. And I loved his relationship that he develops with Freya.
Yeah. That I almost didn't include because I was afraid it was too soon. But like I was thinking, I mean, he's relatively young. He's a little bit of a hothead, even though he's nice. I feel like he's the kind of person that is willing to admit that he maybe was incorrect about things, and tries to give people the benefit of the doubt. But he's one that I really like a lot. And he he gives me like a lot that I can explore. I feel like where with like what is his relationship with Freya, because like she is how she is with boys, and a little bit more flirty and free, and he's very buttoned down and trying to do his family proud, which we actually get to see a family dinner with his family. And the second book that I'm working on, and they're very nice people, but kind of in the way that a lot of families I suspect are, where they're not if they're not happy with something you're doing, they're going to try to still be nice, but if they're like, especially the dad is like, stop trying to free Kale, just go on and live your life. This is not what you should be doing. And he's got several siblings. His younger sister's, I think second oldest, is getting married, and his mom wants him to get married as well. She wants him to be happy, but at the same time she knows he's hung up on this girl he really shouldn't be with by their society standards.
Right.
So it's, to me, like I really, that's a character too that I wasn't sure would be as prominent, but like I really enjoy writing him and Freya together, because again, like there is something about the weird way that they work that shouldn't really work, but it does, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, Michael, those are all the questions that I have for you. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about that we didn't touch?
Not really. I should be working on another thing as well if I find time. But I'm going to try to be working on them simultaneously. I do have an idea for a longer series that focuses more on the writing disappearing.
Yes.
And so I'm hoping that I'll have more information about that later, but it starts with, I wanted to say it just a little bit because like I'm trying to tease people with it.
Yes.
A professor is dying in there's a country to the south called Soldas, which we hear reference, but we don't actually go there. But a professor is dying, and on his deathbed, the only scribes that are available to transcribe the latest work that he brought from a foreign country is these 10 trainees and their master. And what happens is he rips the book into 10 pieces and has them transcribe them really quickly. Well, we're going to find out later that there's something in that book that probably shouldn't have been, that he didn't realize what it was. And those scribes are going to get hunted down one at a time. And that's going to be, that's going to be part of it. And then we're going to see, it's a few hundred years away from Traitors. There's going to be another Reach storyline that's different, but have maybe not ancestors. What's the other way? Descendants of the characters from Traitors. So a little bit of that. I mean, it's going to be a really like this one. It's definitely a trilogy with Crown and Tide. It's not much more than that one single story. This one could be like a longer, sprawling epic, maybe.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to both of those.
I appreciate it.
One of my favorite parts about this series was the magic system and how the writing disappeared when someone died, and just trying to imagine that in our world, and all of the like books that we have that would be completely lost
Oh yeah.
when my writer dies.
Mm-hmm.
All of the letters, you know, I have from my grandparents and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That still has like my grandma's handwriting on it that I keep just to see her handwriting. All of that stuff, like, it's a little mind-blowing to think about that in reality.
Yeah. That's definitely one I want to explore it more. Like, so I actually felt like I had to shoehorn that into this book because it's the same world, but that's not really the point of the story. And, you know, some people said that they wish that there was more, and it's like, well, you know, I mean, it's just a function of the world. The next one that's going to be a big part of it is, you know, who decides what books get passed down and what information is valuable and what should people know, you know?
I mean, it was one of my favorite parts, and I loved it and wanted to see more, but at the same time, I saw the function that it had in this story.
For sure.
If we had more, it didn't feel forced as it was here.
Good.
I felt like if we had more of it, it might have started to feel forced.
And maybe be too much too, because like it really wouldn't serve the correct purpose. Because like, I mean, that's the other thing too, is like somebody was like, oh, there's not very much magic in it. And it's like, well, half the people believe magic is evil and the other half are dumb. You know, like Emil is really stupid. Eric is like not dumb, but he's not like, he doesn't care about it, so he's not going to learn it, you know? So I mean, it's just not something that we see a whole lot of just because of who the characters are. But yeah, like same kind of thing is like, you know, there's gonna be some more magic stuff. There's gonna be a little bit more with I had an idea for like a darker fantasy as well with some of the other creatures of the world, but like for this one I feel like the thing is like the story is the characters and their interactions with each other and how the world kind of both gets shaped by them and shapes them as well, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's all I have. That's all you have. Thank you, Michael, for joining us today. And thank you to everyone out there for watching this. Be sure to go pick up your copy of The Traitors We Are and the prequel novella that just came out, The Revenge of Thousands. You'll want both of those, reading them along. Join us next month. Next month, we'll have an extra episode of Self Pub Sunday. We're going to have Palmer Pickering. Finally, we've got that rescheduled. Michael Schuthless and Kian Ardelin. I probably butchered all of their names, but they'll tell me how to pronounce it next month. So join us next month for those 3 episodes. And I hope you all have a great day.